Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
The cult that we'll be talking about this week is without a doubt the most well-known and most current cult that we've discussed yet.
And the whole point of an EM, this is what Nancy Salzman said. She said it's breaking your stimulus response, disconnecting it from like how you would normally think. Once you're uncomfortable, you used to be uncomfortable with a situation that could have been dangerous, but now you don't feel those negative thoughts towards it anymore.
They were to sit there or lay down and get this tattoo, but what it really was being branded with a cauterizing pen.
So it's just crazy to think that somebody who was like in Hollywood, who was in like a big show, that's as big of a show as Smallville was, to be a part of this and in this secret society and taking collateral of these women and branding them with her initials. Like, it's so wild to think of that. Hi everyone, welcome to Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my two sisters, Stephanie and Katie, just like always. And this week, we are actually wrapping up our 4-part miniseries that's focused on cults. So we hope that you've enjoyed these last few episodes, us talking about specific cults and doing a deep dive into some of these most notorious or interesting cults. And the cult that we'll be talking about this week is without a doubt the most well-known and most current cult that we've discussed yet. So it's happened pretty recently, and I guess it probably is considered one of the most well-known ones now, and that is NXIVM. So while you may know quite a bit about this one already, we felt that we couldn't really do a mini-series on cults without discussing NXIVM because it is definitely a major part of the modern-day discussion on cults. There are quite a few sources out there that are focused on NXIVM already, so mainly the HBO docuseries called The Vow and the Starz docuseries called Seduced Inside the NXIVM Cult. And both of these will inform our discussion, and a lot of the information will be coming from these two major docuseries. So even though the cult is so well known, we'll still give you a bit of a rundown of kind of the major factors in the case and some of the major people that are involved. And because there are 2 multi-episode documentaries and there are full books and full podcast series just about NXIVM already, we could never cover every aspect of it in just this one episode. So it will just be a very basic overview, and in the show notes we'll give you sources and resources and stuff where you can go and learn more about some of these details if you're interested in knowing more, because we will be scratching the surface only. A lot of these details, there's just too much depravity and too many events that are involved to go into every one of these details.
So I think it'll be interesting when you're listening that even though it's a lot more recent than the other ones we did, you'll still see a lot of those same patterns that I think all cults have and that cult leaders kind of embody. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely. When I was like watching the documentaries and learning all the stuff or reading all the research, like it is so many of these common themes that we do see in every single cult that we've talked about so far, and probably every single cult that exists out there. So we might as well just start this discussion with the leader of the cult himself, and that is Keith Raniere. And I feel like it's hard to know what is actually true about Keith's upbringing and his early life. As we'll see later on, he drastically exaggerates much of his achievements, and he was pretty much a professional con artist and a master manipulator. So therefore, we don't really know if the information about his early life is 100% factual. If it came from him, like, we don't know if it can be completely verified. So with that being said, there is a great article by the CBC called The Making of Vanguard by Josh Bloch, Kathleen Goldhar, Anita Elash, and Dave Pizer. And this gives us a good picture and a look into the earlier years of Keith Raniere's life. But like I said, I mean, I'm sure some of it has been kind of corroborated with other people in his life, but things that came from Keith directly himself can't be 100% verified. So Keith was born on August 26th, 1960, and his father was in advertising and his mother was a dancer who died when Keith was only 17 years old. Keith's parents supposedly separated when Keith was 8, and after the divorce, he went to live with his mother, who he claimed was an alcoholic. And the CBC article says that Keith at some point told a former girlfriend that he, quote, became a night owl because as a teenager, he was often up late looking after his mother, end quote. So Keith boasted about the amazing achievements that he had in his formative years. He says that he was, quote, speaking in full sentences by age 1, reading by age 2, and had mastered college-level math before high school, end quote. And he also allegedly had a genius-level IQ, according to himself anyways. He went on to get college degrees in math, biology, and physics. So, I mean, don't think there's any doubt that he was, an intelligent person at the very least. I mean, he did get, degrees in these difficult or hard subjects, math, biology, and physics. So he was smart in that way. But I think a lot of what he was telling people, like, that he was speaking in full sentences by age 1. He was also claimed that he was a musical prodigy, like he was able to play like master level piano at a very young age as well. So he basically said that he was a master of everything and that he was, had a super huge IQ and was basically the smartest person in the world. One of Keith's earliest professional endeavors was the formation of Consumers Byline Inc. And this was a company that he founded and ran until it was eventually shut down in the early 1990s after being investigated by over 20 states and was accused of being an illegal pyramid scheme. So, according to an article from Times Union, Keith did not admit any wrongdoing, but he did sign an agreement which prevented him from taking part in a pyramid scheme again. And he also had to pay a $40,000 fine, but that's all he got as punishment. So he basically ran this huge corporation, Consumers Byline, that was a pretty successful company at its height, but it was structured very much like pyramid schemes that we all know about. And so
aren't you not allowed to be in a pyramid scheme anyway? So like his punishment is just to agree not to do something illegal. Okay, great. Like
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Even though he already did something illegal.
Yeah, that's just like someone murdering someone. It's like, as long as you don't do it again, just don't murder somebody and we're good.
Yeah, and pay $40,000, which I'm sure he made a lot of money at Consumers Byline, because like I said, it was a pretty successful business at its height. So, $40,000 to him was probably not much of a, pocket change for him maybe. So he really got off with really no consequences at all, which is unfortunate because if he had actually had consequences back then it would have prevented all of this horrible stuff that eventually ends up happening. So it seems like after his experience with Consumers Byline, Keith didn't learn his lesson as he took some of the pyramid schemey aspects of Consumers Byline and brought that over to his next professional endeavor, which was NXIVM, which he ended up founding only a short time after. So while I said he didn't learn his lesson, or maybe he did learn exactly the right lesson that he wanted to learn, figured out how to run a successful pyramid scheme, but maybe he took some of the mistakes that caused Consumers Byline to be kind of short-lived, he was able to kind of prevent NXIVM from having that same fate for a long time until eventually it all unraveled. Founded in 1998 alongside Nancy Salzman, NXIVM began as Executive Success Programs, or ESP, which we'll probably refer to it as ESP throughout the rest of the episode. So ESP was basically a series of self-help programs within the NXIVM umbrella company. And these programs claim to offer help for people seeking self-improvement and claim that it could lead people to the success that they were falling short of in their lives. And my understanding is that ESP is really what it was sort of known as and was advertised as, or people that were going out and kind of recruiting other people to become a part of ESP didn't really know necessarily about the name NXIVM. Like, although NXIVM was the umbrella company that it eventually was under, but that wasn't like what it was referred to, or as everyone knows now, it's referred to as NXIVM, but it really was Executive Success Programs was the main bulk of the work that they were doing at the earlier stages of it. According to professional cult expert Rick Ross, a lot of the teachings of these executive success programs were taken from other organizations or cults, such as Scientology. So there were topics such as neuro-linguistic programming, which, on its own can be a very legitimate technique for licensed psychotherapists to use with clients. This was sort of a topic, NLP, that's called neuro-linguistic programming, but that was one thing that NXIVM took and kind of recrafted or used in their own way. So I feel like they kind of make it look a little bit bad considering what they do with it, but on its own could be something that could be very useful if it's used right. So essentially a lot of the programming and the curriculum that they were offering in these programs were not original or revolutionary material, but it was rather ideas and techniques that were stolen from other places, some legitimate places, and then other cults that were used for Keith's own nefarious means. So he's kind of just plagiarizing a lot of this stuff in the curriculum and then kind of rebranding it at his own ideas, and so much that people thought that he was like the smartest person in the world because he had all of these amazing techniques and he could, reform people's lives and help people, even though a lot of it was either bullshit or stuff that was stolen from other sources. Keith Raniere himself is a classic example of a narcissist. As I mentioned earlier, he drastically exaggerated a lot of his accomplishments and thought very highly of himself. Therefore, everyone else around him did as well. So he seemed to be very good at turning on the charm and bringing people into his close circle and making them really trust him in a very short amount of time. So as we'll see a little bit later on when we discuss this case, this proved to be very successful for him at the beginning and allowed him to amass so many devoted followers. According to the CBC article, The Making of Vanguard, Barbara Boucher, who's an ex-girlfriend of Keith's, disclosed that a lot of times she would often be told by other ex-girlfriends while she was still with Keith that things like her diet and her bad mood could affect Keith because he apparently had the ability to feel other people's energies even when they're not in his presence. So therefore, if she was in a bad mood or had a bad diet, that would impede Keith's own well-being. So people were telling her this in a way to make her control the way what she was doing and every action that she had because her quote unquote bad actions, bad diet would impede Keith's ability to basically be at his top potential.
It blows my mind how very manipulative he is. Even at a young age, people believing him like he's the smartest person in the world or whatever. When I first heard about NXIVM, when I was reading it a couple years ago, before we even started this podcast, when the news came out about NXIVM, we'll get into that later, but if you didn't know what NXIVM was, or if you didn't know what a cult was, those programs that NXIVM started, you would think they were legit. For me, when I was reading about it, I was like, oh yeah, those courses seem like they're self-help courses, oh, maybe they'll help people. I never thought, after reading it, I found out later, but I never thought in a million years that that's what it turned into. It was so crazy how, you'll see how crazy it gets when we get into it, but, for me, it was oh, NXIVM can't be that bad. It just seems like just another churchy cult like we see in the other ones that we talked about, but it's so crazy to me.
And I think too, I've watched interviews with some people who got out of the cult, specifically Sarah Edmonston, and she's the main one, but a lot of them say that, they can't necessarily say that some of the early stuff that they did or the courses they took weren't helpful because they feel like if they weren't helpful, then they wouldn't have stayed as long as they were. If it didn't help them at all. So I feel like a lot of them think, or I think in general, if you took a self-help program that had the right intentions that was similar to some of these, you might have a lot of success. And if you feel like you're more successful and you overcome certain things that you're struggling with in your life, then, who's to say that that's not a success story? So I feel like some of this, if it hadn't had all of the all the stuff behind the scenes or all the things that were going on that they didn't know about or all of the intentions that Keith really did have, then obviously for a lot of these people, it did help them in many ways. And I think that there's also an example too of that one guy. I don't know if it's in The Vow or maybe it's in the other documentary, but the guy who had Tourette's and he was able to overcome his Tourette's because of these ESP programs and the neuro-linguistic programming. We can't sit here and say that that wasn't a success story for him, even though it was a part of something that ended up being bad. But you know what I mean? Going
back to you talked about Sarah Edmonston. I'll get into her story a little bit later, but she was coming from Vancouver where she wanted to was an actress and she was struggling. It's these cult leaders always know who to target. They're targeting people who need help, or like are finding a different path in life. They're not looking for somebody who's like very successful or very, well, maybe like some of the people that we're going to talk about, like they were looking for something else in their life that was meaningful. They wanted to have a purpose in their life, so they're always targeting those type of people who want to change their life. And I just find it so fascinating that like they can just be, I don't want to say brainwashed, but they can just be like brought in like or whatever. And it was just like her story was one that caught, like when I was reading about her, like I was just such in awe, because it was like I felt so bad for her in the beginning. I mean, I still feel bad for her now, but I felt so bad for her in the beginning, and when we get later into the episode I'll talk about her. But it was just crazy to me, like how these people can just be sucked into something that's, to them it's real, but in reality it's actually not really real at all.
Also, I think, like AJ was saying, the first ESP, if you just took that and then got out, then yeah, that probably was a good thing. It was a good course. It taught you something, and maybe it did help you in your life. And I feel like they use that as kind of like every step of the way was kind of a filter. So you did that and then you left. People that were left were kind of maybe a little bit more vulnerable, wanted a bit more. The next step filtered out more people. Some people are like, nah, this is getting too weird, I'm out. People that didn't leave, the next step was like, it got weirder and weirder and like more dangerous as they kept going. And I always wonder if it was intentional from the beginning for that to happen, or if Keith kind of saw the power that he had and made it that way. I find it hard to believe that someone like Nancy Salzman was in with him at the beginning being like, let's brainwash people to get them to be completely different people. But I feel like that's just kind of the road it went. And maybe she didn't even realize at the beginning that she was helping him do that. So I find it like interesting to see like what it was meant to be from the beginning, or if that's really what his whole plan was this whole time.
Yeah, that's what I wonder too. It's so hard to determine that. I would be very interested to know if they just sort of fell into it. They realized the power that they had over these people, and then they just kept taking it a step further, a step further, a step further, as much as they could get away with, or if it was this huge elaborate plan from the beginning. And I can't really tell what it was.
But it surprises me that like for someone like Nancy Salzman, who had like a successful career and stuff like that, like that she stuck with it even if it even got weirder. Or maybe she just didn't realize, or she didn't understand what was happening at the time and just kept going with it. But I don't know, for me it's really hard for me to believe that she,
I mean, I'll get into a little bit later sort of the hierarchy there, but she was basically as high up as Keith without being Keith himself. So she was, throughout the whole thing, his right-hand person. And so I would find it hard to believe that she wouldn't know everything, or wouldn't at least be involved in some sort of... She's just as guilty as Keith is in many ways. Maybe less so for certain things, but, you know, she was there with him every step of the way. Yeah, it's crazy to me that somebody like Keith can be just so manipulative and so powerful that he can have this hold over this group of people. And like Katie said too, a lot of people, like there are stories too where, you know, we'll get into a little bit, like India Oxenberg is one of the main people who was kind of in it, but her mother talks about how she like attended some of the early ESP courses with India. They kind of did it together, but she kind of saw through Keith, or saw him for what he was. So like it was sort of a filter, like people who kind of caught on to his BS early on sort of would take the ESP course, maybe get something out of it, maybe not, and then just leave. Versus the ones, yeah, by the time you get through all the steps before it, it's like you are willing to do anything, because if you were going to back out, you would have backed out very early on. So that filter thing is actually a pretty accurate depiction, I feel. So with the thing with his ex-girlfriend Barbara, like how her diet and her bad mood would affect Keith. So it was just kind of an example of the type of aura that Keith had, and sort of the attitudes of the people who thought so highly of him as well. So they thought that he had the potential to save the world. So anything that would sort of impede that had to be sort of stopped. So they would tell Barbara that like she had to be on a certain diet or she couldn't have these mood swings or anything like that. So to them, Keith was the vanguard. He was an all-knowing master who was extremely smart and had ideas that could save the world. So like I said, things that would impede this was unwanted, and anything that would nourish that potential was encouraged. So because of the way that he presented himself, he was the center of everyone's universe within NXIVM. They looked to him for advice on everything they did and even had to ask his permission for many things. So people lived their day-to-day lives according to how Keith would want them to, never wanting to do anything that would damage their relationship with him or his opinions of them. So now having a very powerful and knowledgeable person with great life experience and great wisdom of the world would be a very valuable asset to have in a community, but only if that person has the right intentions at heart. And this is something that Keith definitely didn't have throughout the whole thing, whether he had it at the beginning and then lost it, or whether he never had it at all. Like I said, we don't know. But yeah, he could have been a great resource and a great, asset to these people if he had good intentions. One of the major pyramid schemey sort of aspects that Keith implemented into NXIVM was something known as the strike path. And now this is something that if you look into NXIVM in any sort of detail, you'll probably find something about the strike path. And when someone began taking these ESP courses and became immersed in the program, they could earn a colored sash, which would represent the level that they were at within the company. And as you worked your way up by taking more and more courses and recruiting more and more people to take courses, you would earn a higher level sash or higher color sash, eventually working up your way to a gold sash, which in theory was the highest sash, but barely anyone in the company ever made it this high. So according to Frank Parlato, he was a member of NXIVM who eventually left and then helped to expose the cult afterwards, broke down sort of the different steps of the stripe path, and he wrote about it on his blog, and it's documented on artvoice.com. So I'm going to just kind of run through sort of the different sort of stages of the stripe path just to get you a general idea of what people were working towards and how it kind of, the structure of it worked. So the white sash was the entry sash. So this was for people who just joined the company and paid to take a training. So as soon as you paid to take your first ESP course and you attended the training, you were given a white sash. And then the next step up was the yellow sash. And this was when you were a coach. So basically these people worked for the organization for free to bring people into the group, and you kind of would become the coach for the people who you would recruit into the company. So just basically still entry level, but just the next step up. You've taken a couple trainings, you know a little bit more, and you've recruited someone into the program. And then the next step up after that was the orange sash, and this was the proctor level. And this is the first stage in the stripe path where people could start earning a salary for their work in the company, although it was a very small salary compared to what you were paying to take the course. So a lot of people mention in their interviews and stuff when they left NXIVM saying that a lot, if you were making any sort of money from commissions, a lot of that money you were making was just going back into NXIVM to take more trainings, because you had to take, it started with the 5-day training and then the 11-day training, and then you just had to keep taking more and more training. So you were always having to pay so much money. So basically you weren't really earning or taking away much money. You were just putting all of it back into NXIVM basically. And then there's the green sash, and this is considered a senior proctor. And it's estimated that by the time you've made it to a green sash, you've invested about $1 million into NXIVM after all the trainings you've taken and all of the money that you've spent in order to reach this level. So this is according to Frank Parlato in his blog about this. So I don't know if that's 100% true, but according to him, you've probably invested close to $1 million by the time you reach the green sash. And then the next stage up after that is the blue sash. And when you have this sash, you are considered a counselor, and you've invested up to $5 million in the company. And I think in the blog post that Frank writes, there's only like one person who ever had a blue sash. And then there's the purple sash, which is the senior counselor. And according to Frank Parlato, only a few people have ever made it to this stage as well. All of the people who made it to the purple sash stage all of them were women, and all of them were girlfriends of Keith Raniere. And then the next stage up after that was the gold sash. Like I said before, the gold sash was the highest level that you can reach. It's the top of the top, basically. And Nancy Salzman, she's the co-founder of NXIVM. She was also called prefect by everyone in ESP or in NXIVM. They had to refer to her as prefect. She was the sole gold sash in the entire history of NXIVM. So like I said, she was basically at the top of it all, right underneath the Keith there. As it turns out, the decision of who moved up the ranks into the various colors of the stripe path was solely Keith's decision to make, and it was completely arbitrary. So I kind of see it as sort of the dangling the carrot. Like, you were told that you can make it up to this stage if you just take another training, but then you take the training, you pay all this money, and then it's like, oh, well, you still haven't learned everything that you need to learn. So if you take this next training, more training, then you'll get up to this level. So it was always like dangling the idea of getting up to this higher level, but you had to pay all this money, and it was really arbitrary. Like, Keith would just decide, like, I don't think I want this person to be on this level, so I'm just going to tell them they're not ready. When really it's like there was no real sort of criteria that was actually legitimate.
Yeah, in the Seduced documentary, there's one woman that says she probably had spent over $100,000 going through these courses trying to make her way up, and then when she was finally kind of paid it off by working for NXIVM, then that's when they'd be like, oh, we have this new these new courses, this new track that you can take if you really want to get promoted. And so it's kind of like you've already invested all this time and money, and it would be a waste to give up now. So I feel like that was probably people's mentality as well. It's like, I might as well keep going because I'm this far, which, you know, screwed a lot of people out of a lot of money.
Yeah, and also it's like, when you think about it, in their mind, like Keith's mind and Nancy's mind, it's like, well, if they do get up to as high of a level as us, we can't make any more money off them. If there's no more training for them to take, they're not going to be paying anything. So what use are they? I feel like that's kind of also too. It's like, well, they're going to keep paying us if we just tell them, oh, you know, there's this $10,000 training that you haven't taken yet. So that's also probably had a lot to do with it too. So as you can tell, this aspect of the company was very much structured like a pyramid scheme, which is the thing that Keith loved best. And like I said earlier, ESP was very much promoted as these self-help courses to improve people's lives. And like we've seen in other cults, like because these people were kind of going through these intense trainings and this intensive sort of courses, that a lot of them were treated like group therapy sessions. A lot of them, they were like these intense, like 16-hour days of group therapy, and people were telling their deepest secrets and like feeling like they were overcoming these huge hurdles in their lives. So it kind of really bonded a lot of these people together early on. You're kind of going through this great thing together. So it did really form, this tight-knit little community of people very early on. And, you know, it came with lavish week-long celebrations every summer for Keith's birthday. This was known as V-Week. And V-Week was like the culmination of everyone's hard work throughout the year. And the purpose of this event was basically to thank Keith for creating NXIVM and helping them vastly improve their lives. And when you think about it, if creating an annual week-long celebration for your own birthday, where people bow down to you, sing for you, and thank you endlessly, if that isn't the epitome of narcissism, then I don't know what is. And everyone had to call him Vanguard. Like, that's how they would refer to him. And that's why it was called V-Week, because he was a vanguard. So that kind of gives you sort of an idea of Keith, who he sort of was, and kind of what the foundation of NXIVM was, like why people joined it and why they thought it could be a good thing for them.
Going back to Sarah Edmonston, she was one of the women in NXIVM to kind of, after she left, to kind of out NXIVM and expose them for what they really were, and she was in the vow. So I'm just gonna like talk about how she got into NXIVM and also how she got out. Sarah Edmonston was in NXIVM for about 12 years, and like I just said, in NXIVM there was these different levels. She kind of worked her way up to be a coach, and then when she became a coach, she was the one recruiting people into NXIVM, and she kind of had these people under her, took these people under her wing, and she was kind of one of,
because it was kind of like the pyramid scheme sort of thing. Like when you would recruit someone, like you would be their coach, so like you would be their sort of person that they would, and then with every person that person recruits, you get money as well, right? That's like the foundation of a pyramid scheme.
Yes, and so her goal was to eventually make money, because I don't know if AJ, if you mentioned this, but like a lot of these courses were like really expensive, and a lot of people were going into debt. As the more courses they took, the more money they would have to pay. So you work your way up as quick as you can so you could get to the top level and be paid. For Sarah, she eventually ended up being proctor and became one of the, I wouldn't say head of the NXIVM, but she became one of the well-known people of NXIVM.
Yeah, like I think she made it as high as a green sash. Like she was a senior proctor. That was her level. And she says in some interviews that she was making like at the height of it, she was making like 20K a month sometimes, from all the people she was recruiting, and she was really good at sales, so she was able to like get so many people into NXIVM and start taking these programs.
And because she wasn't from Hollywood, but she was an actor in Vancouver, she kind of had those connections. As she kept ranking up higher and higher, she got more interested in NXIVM, and she was starting to really become proud of herself, because she was an actress, but she was kind of at her peak where she didn't know where, like she wasn't getting very many acting jobs, and she was kind of just trying to figure out where her life path was going. So when she got into NXIVM, it was kind of like this revelation, like, oh, I can like do more, like I can, like I'm finding out stuff about myself that I never knew I did. So as higher up she went, the more proud of herself she was becoming, because she also said too that like it helped her, like there was a period where she was started to get a lot more acting roles because of the work I guess she was doing. Like maybe she was able to, self-help and improve and cleared her mind better, and she was getting more roles. And then it kind of got to a point where she started to feel bad for taking acting roles, because the sort of general vibe of NXIVM was that they wanted you to they wanted you to move to Albany and be close to the main base of NXIVM, which was in Albany. And if you didn't do that, then you were kind of seen as, like, they were always trying to get you to do that. Or if you were acting, maybe your focus was split and they didn't want that, which is maybe why Allison Mack didn't really do much acting after she was in Smallville. So, yeah. So Sarah eventually ended up meeting her husband in NXIVM, and he goes by the name Nippy, and he was part of NXIVM. So they ended up meeting and got married. Sarah really leaned on one of her good friends that she met in NXIVM, and that was Lauren Salzman, who was a daughter of Nancy Salzman. Lauren and Sarah really hit it off and became like super, super close, and Lauren was already in NXIVM for a few years before Sarah was, so she could help Sarah be the better person that she wanted to be, and Sarah really looked up to her. And this is how Sarah got into the program called DOS.
Yeah, so it's DOS, which means Dominus Obsequious Sororium, which translates to Master Slave Sorority.
Lauren was a big influence on Sarah for getting Sarah into DOS, and Lauren kind of made it sound like it was a great thing that she needed to get into, and that it was all women, and that it was just something that Lauren really. So like when she was talking to Sarah about it, I remember watching the episode on The Vow, and you could tell in Lauren's voice, like, you could tell how excited she was to be in DOS, and that how Sarah, she kind of seemed skeptical at first, but then the way that Lauren was like convincing her, and she kind of finally was like, okay, well, this is my best friend. Like, I don't think she'd be like lying to me. I don't think she'll, like, she's just looking out for my best interest. So when Sarah decided to join DOS, she just thought it was just like another type of program where you had to like recruit people, and kind of like the same thing she was already been doing, but it started becoming like a more of a constant, like everyday thing. She had to call Lauren her master, because Lauren was responsible for her when she got into DOS. So
Lauren actually used those words, slave and master. Like those were the words that she used. And in this interview, I think it's like ABC 2020 or something, and the interview was questioning, it's like she used those words, and then Sarah's like, yeah, she used those words, but she would always say, it's just a metaphor. Like, yes, that's what it's called, but like, it's not really that. It's just like the metaphor for what we're doing. And basically, the whole thing of DOS was supposed to be this like secret society of women within NXIVM. So obviously NXIVM was both men and women, but DOS was supposed to be this secret society that none of the men knew about, and it was like this secret sorority kind of, and the person who brought you in would be your master, and then you would then become the master of the people that you brought in. So again, it was like that sort of pyramid schemey sort of leveling aspect to it. And DOS was obviously created much later on. Like you said, Sarah was in NXIVM for 12 years, and DOS was like the very end stages of her being in it, because it's what happens in DOS that really pushes her over the edge. So DOS was created by, I think it was Allison Mack, right? Was the one who created, well, Keith, but with Allison Mack.
At the beginning, they kind of sold it as Keith has nothing to do with it, and it was kind of supposed to be sort of separate from NXIVM, but people in NXIVM could be selected for this special secret group that Keith wasn't a part of. That's what they said at the beginning. So I think that was kind of an allure to be like, not everybody gets invited into this secret women's sorority. And that was one of the things that people liked about it, I guess.
But it was kind of like they were using the people within NXIVM as a recruitment for DOS. Like nobody from outside of NXIVM would have been put into DOS, right? Like you had to be part of NXIVM to be in DOS, even though it was sort of supposed to be separate.
Yeah, you probably had to, they probably picked you specifically, once we get into it, like probably because of how you looked and what Keith liked, but also because you had that vulnerability and that they knew that they could do these kinds of things to you, and you'd either be accepting of it or you would eventually just learn to be accepting. So they weren't just going to pick some stranger off the street and get them in this group because a person that hadn't gone through that whole NXIVM kind of levels wouldn't, they'd definitely have some red flags right away.
Yeah, like, you're not going to be day one in NXIVM and you're going to ask to be joined and become a slave for someone. Literally using that word. So, yeah, it's like years and years of you already putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars for all these trainings and obviously having some success. Like I said, with the filtering thing, like if you've come this far and you've taken all these courses to the point where you're being approached to be in DOS, then they know that you're somebody who is so deep into it that you're very likely to agree to it by that point.
I guess one of the main things about DOS was, like we were saying, the master-slave thing, but it was also made for the women to kind of feel very uncomfortable in the situation that they were put in, but to do it anyway to overcome your fears or overcome that uncomfort. And so that's how you grow as a person. So that was kind of their mantra, I guess, to get people to do these things that they wouldn't normally feel comfortable doing.
But that was because, that was a big thing of NXIVM. Part of the courses that they were taking, one of the major aspects of it was, I guess in simpler terms, saying you have a fight or flight response, but in a way they were sort of training that out of you. And it's well, if you're in a situation that's uncomfortable and you want to flee, then we have to do work. That must be a reflection of you. There's something that's blocking you from wanting to take part in this. So let's explore that. What's causing this? And then kind of training you to ignore the fight or flight response, which was perfect training for DOS.
Yeah, exactly. They called them EMs, which was an exploration of meaning. And so if you had a negative thought about something, they would be, oh, well, go get an EM on that. And it would basically be, and the whole point of an EM, this is what Nancy Salzman said. She said it's breaking your stimulus response and disconnecting it from how you would normally think. And so you see a bad situation, get an EM, and you'll no longer have that negative feeling towards that situation anymore. And so that issue will be gone, and then eventually you'll forget that you even had an issue with that thing. So it was very much breaking down, that fight or flight. So once you're uncomfortable, you used to be uncomfortable with a situation that could have been dangerous, but now you don't feel those negative thoughts towards it anymore. And that's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, which is so crazy to think that they're able to do that. And I guess that's makes it make sense, right? When it's years of training that out of you, then all of a sudden, you're approached to be part of DOS and you hear those words of master and slave. And then your initial reaction is to be what? No. And then they're probably going to say, well, go get an EM and then you'll work that out and then come back to us, because there's obviously something within yourself that's causing you to have this negative reaction. Because this is like a great thing. So if you're reacting negatively to it, then there's something you need to work on.
Yeah, and I think this is where when they first begin the program and you get an EM, because some people at the very beginning, the very first like 5-day course, you could get an EM on something and people would have these breakthroughs, but it probably would be something where in real life, everyday life, that is something that you'd want to overcome. Like say, oh, I have social anxiety about going and meeting new people. Well, let's talk about that. You'll get over that. So that's something like, oh, this is actually super great. Now I don't have social anxiety anymore. But then you take it further where it's like, let's take a naked picture of you and send it to Keith. I don't like that, but I'll get an EM, and now it doesn't seem so weird. And that was exactly the kind of thing that they were doing. And like that exact example was happening. So, I mean, they were just breaking you down one EM at a time.
Hello internet friends, and welcome to Go Ask Alice, the show where we jump down random internet rabbit holes and bring you wonderful factoids from our adventures in Wiki Wonderland. I'm Drew, a forensic scientist, and my favorite word is sesquipedalian.
I'm Lindsay, and I have resting friend-making face.
And I'm Sarah, and I am in a constant state of existential crisis.
Our travels through Wikipedia could lead us anywhere, so you never know what interesting topic you're going to hear about. Places we've previously visited on Wikipedia include...
I ended up on a book called The Book of Wonders, or The Book of Surprises.
The Legend of the Cock Lane Ghost.
Mimics from D&D.
Cursed Tablets.
Listen by searching for Go Ask Alice wherever you get your podcasts.
And like I think like for Sarah, like since she looked up to Lauren, she thought it was okay because okay, Lauren's in it, it must be like a good thing. And so to be in DOS, the secret society thing, you had to give collateral, and collateral could be anything like that's worth your life. So I'd say like Kate's like a naked picture of yourself, or for Sarah, she didn't really have anything that she really wanted to like, she didn't have anything bad about her life at that time that she wanted to give up. So she just started shit talking her husband. And
there was like an example she gives in an interview where, actually I can't remember if it was Sarah herself or she's talking about it, but it's where if they didn't have anything negative to say, then it would be like, we'll make up a huge lie or a secret, like write a letter, a confession letter to your family about something awful that you did, even if it's not true. And then that's going to ensure that you don't tell anyone about DOS, or you don't leave DOS, because then we'll release that confession to your family that you've written. Or Sarah says that Lauren even asked her to get the deed of her house signed over to Lauren as collateral. So basically, once you're in DOS and you sign this over to me, if you leave DOS, I'm going to take your house, basically. Sarah said she didn't actually end up doing that, but that was one like sort of option that Lauren had asked.
Oh, I was just going to say the collateral, it gives me Jim Jones flashbacks, right? Because he made his members do that too, where if they were going to leave, well, you've signed this incriminating thing that we will release. So it's, along the same lines.
And like I said, yeah, any normal person like us who's not been in a cult, who hasn't been in NXIVM for 12 years, is saying, of course, like, I'm not going to do that. It's ridiculous. But like I said, if you've had 12 years thousands of hours worth of training to say that we have good intentions, we're saving the world, everything that you think, if you're having a negative reaction to something that's bad, you have to overcome it, and then you'll be over it and you'll reach your full potential. Like, if that's all you're being told for 12 years, then, she said that she did have obviously reservations when she's hearing all this, but she still did it because that's kind of the way that she was trained for 12 years. So it would be hard, I feel like, you not to do it.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, you go through all these levels and you're just trying to get farther up. And this was kind of presented as, this is how you're going to get there, because this is going to give you the ultimate empowerment. And so if you do want to keep working your way up, then this is the course that you have to take. And was convincing for a lot of people. And it was very much after they would give them the collateral or give them these secrets, that's when they would introduce the slave master kind of thing. So they're already in it, then they hear about it, and then it's like, well, I've already, committed to this, so here we go, kind of thing.
And that's the thing too, like when you think of it just on a logical level, it's like if this is really something good and we are saving the world or we're all going to be better versions of ourselves, why do you need that collateral piece? Like, why is it that they need something horrible from you first? Because, like, you know what I mean? Like, normally that's a red flag of like, well, what we're going to do to you is so terrible that you're going to want to expose us. But now because we have this collateral, you can't. Or you feel you can't. So it's like, just on a logical level, also, it's like, if they're asking for collateral, there's obviously a reason why they know that you would want to leave.
Well, yeah, and it's taking that self-help thing to the extreme, because I know some self-help things, it'll be, you have to write down all the reasons why. Say you want to give up drinking or something. Well, what are the reasons why? And they list 20 reasons. And so every time that you're going to think about drinking, think about those reasons. And that's kind of like collateral, but in a positive sense. It's like, I'm going to stop like ruining my body for all of these reasons. But they took it the other way. Whereas if you don't do this, then we're going to ruin you in another way. So it was very kind of supposed to be motivating, but they twisted it to be blackmail. It just straight up blackmail.
Yeah, and not only did they want you to give you up collateral, they also, in the program, in DOS itself, you had to count your calories. You had to only eat a certain amount of calories a day. You had to follow all these rules. You had to do like this really, really rigid schedule of things you had to do, like get up at 5 a.m., go to the gym, go to the do courses or whatever. So it was very like, you'd get sleep deprived and you'd like starving yourself. And it's kind of like, well, any cult really, like you have strict rules that you have to follow in order to stay in the thing.
And it wasn't only that, it was also too that they were told, we can message you at any time and we're going to text you saying, are you awake, or are you, whatever, and you have to respond within a certain amount of time. So, they could, your master, like quote unquote master, could text you at 5 a.m. and you would have to respond by 5:03. And if you didn't respond by 5:03, then you're going to be punished severely. So it was like keeping you always on alert. You always had to basically be on call 24 hours a day. And even if they didn't have a task for you, like they could just text you and then you would respond and they'd say, okay, thank you. Like that was it. So it's like constant being on top of you, controlling your every move, basically, along with all the other stuff that you mentioned, Steph.
Yeah, and that was one of the tactics. Like Steph was saying, they had to count their calories, and when it came down to it, it was kind of chalked up to, because that's kind of what Keith preferred in women, was really thin women. And when we start talking about India Oxenberg, who was in even kind of deeper than Sarah in a way, she says that she was told she had to go down to 106 pounds, and she said she hadn't been 106 pounds since she was like 12 years old. And so when she didn't reach that goal, she was punished. She had to move to Albany for 30 days as a punishment, kind of. And then once she finally did lose all that weight, she was losing her hair. She could see that her just not healthy. And so, but she did it because that was one of her tasks that she had to do. And it was basically just because Keith liked that kind of thing. So that was part of their routine, was keeping them hungry, keeping them exhausted and tired and busy, so that really all they could think about was that, like how hungry they were, how much they had to do. So they didn't really have time to think about what was actually happening to them. And that was one of the kind of the tactics that they used as well to control them.
So for Sarah, one of the things that was part of DOS was like, it's kind of like a sorority, like that's in the name itself. So you know how in sororities you have initiation night. Well, for DOS, initiation, so Sarah describes it as she was blindfolded, taken from her house, put into this van and taken to a secret location. I'm using air quotes, secret location. And once she got there and she took the blindfold off, she actually realized it looked like Alice and Mac's house, is what she described it as in her interview. And when she got there, they were told that they were going to be getting tattoos of kind of like a brand, but like a tattoo, and they were kind of describing it how it was going to look like, and it was going to be like, I forget what she described it as.
Well, they were told that it was the tattoo they were going to get was like a symbol of the elements, like water and the mountains and the sky or something, and it was supposed to be all of those elements put into one image. Is what they were told that tattoo was going to be. It's part of this initiation into DOS in Alice and Mac's living room.
Like I said, when Sarah got there, she kind of thought was like, okay, like this is Sarah or this is Alice and Mac's house. Like, why are we at Alice and Mac's house to begin with? Like, she didn't. I don't think she knew that Allison was like a part of DOS, or she knew but didn't know how deep Allison was in it. And so when they got there, they were told that they were gonna get like these tattoos, and turned out to be like this dark room in the house, and it was like this table, like a metal table, and they would sit there or lay down and get this tattoo. But what it really was being branded with a cauterizing pen. Sarah was in the interview, she was saying that like this is the best thing, like we're all gonna have the same thing, it's gonna be very exciting, we're all gonna be sisters, and it's just something that we all need to do. And for Sarah, she's like, what, like literally what the hell, why are we getting branded anyways? But she went along with it. She watched all the other people sit down or lay down on this table, like two people had to hold the hand and one person had to hold the feet, and they just burned your skin. And Sarah said she just kind of when it was her turn, she just like left her body.
There was an interview where she said it was worse than childbirth, and it was like, you know, a hot laser going across your skin for a half an hour without anesthetic. Like, that's pretty drastic.
Like, I couldn't imagine like going to this place. I've gotten a tattoo, and I mean, it hurt like hell, but I can't imagine like my flesh being burnt.
And I think the point, like one of the points of this is Keith in one of his speeches is saying people don't bond over excitement and happiness. You only bond over pain and fear. And so this is probably an exercise to bring people closer together in this kind of situation. Everybody went through it, this painful thing, and they came out stronger and closer in the end. So I think that was the thinking behind it, or the rationale to tell people behind it. So yeah. When you think about India Oxenberg, who I said was like kind of in it even further, even though she wasn't in it as long as Sarah, I don't think, because she was in it from 2011 to 2018. So it was 7 years, and you said Sarah was in it for 12. So she was in it for less, but I think the fact that she was recruited when she was only 19, which is younger than when Sarah was recruited. So she was definitely just more, vulnerable and able to be manipulated more at that younger age. But India was branded, and she was one of the first to be branded out of everybody. And she kind of didn't see it the same way as Sarah. Maybe she came out of it very proud and happy that she had this brand, because that's kind of how deep in it she was. And she was branded, and her, like, somehow it got out there that her mom had found out that this was happening, and her mom had even asked her about it, and she said, yeah, and it's a good thing, and she was kind of talking to her mom about it. So that's kind of her mindset, was even after this had happened to her, she was still like proud and happy to be in DOS and NXIVM.
Yeah, and it's pretty crazy that, you could get to a state where you would be branded and go through that horrible, painful experience and still 100% be... Like, obviously, I get the vibe from Sarah Edmondson that, like, the brand was the end of the road for her. That's when she realized she had to get the fuck out of there. Even though she went through with the branding situation, but also when you're in that moment... Because even the interviewer, like, the ABC 2020 interview with Sarah, where the reporter's kind of pushing her on, like, how did you not run out of there? Like... get out when you found it was a brand. And Sarah said she didn't feel like she had a choice in that moment to leave. It was almost like she really felt that she had no other choice. But it was after getting the brand, shortly after getting the brand, it was really kind of the end of the road for her, especially when she found out what the brand actually was, because it wasn't actually a symbol of the elements. Steph, if you want to say what it actually was.
It was actually Keith's initials and Alice and Mac's initials as well. Because if you look at the brand, like from on an angle, it's KR and AM is what it kind of looks like on what actually not kind of what it looks like, what it is on the thing. So basically, they were branding themselves with Keith's name. Like, so he owns them.
Yeah, he owns them. He and Allison Mack. And to me, I mean, it doesn't look like a symbol of the elements at all. To me, it only looks like KR and AM. It's kind of one of those things, like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Also, I feel like in interviews with Sarah and other people, they said that they really had no idea at the very beginning of DOS, obviously, that Keith was at the top of DOS, because it was supposed to be this sort of secret sorority that was run by women. And so even if Allison Mack was at the top, they thought maybe Allison Mack was the top, but it was really just all the inner workings of Keith Raniere, and he knew exactly what was going on. He knew who was in it. He knew what was happening. And I mean, they have his initials on their bodies now. So, I mean, I don't know if that's ever been definitively proved that was 100% what it was. Do we know that for sure?
Yeah. So when I first watched The Vow, I was kind of not convinced that, because they said that they're pretty sure Keith was involved. It was his initials, and it was probably his idea. And then, but at the end of that, like, they really don't have proof, and they just think that it probably was him. But when you watch Seduced, there's actual footage, like audio footage of Keith talking about DOS and the master slave, and even the branding, even his initials, and kind of make it look like the elements. So the whole thing is planned out. So yeah, it definitely was Keith, and it was supposed to be his initials, and all of that was planned out by Keith, even though they said it wasn't. I guess saying Keith wasn't a part of it was supposed to make people, I don't know, trust it more, which is kind of weird, or maybe just that they were kind of branching off to their own thing. But one of like India's assignments that she got from Allison was she had to seduce Keith, and Keith was supposed to be like celibate, like, oh, he doesn't have sex, he's like a monk kind of thing, is what he portrayed himself as. And so to seduce him, Keith had to take a naked picture of her and send it to Allison for proof that she had done it, and she actually did do it, and she just thought that was kind of the end of it. But Keith himself would text India asking for, like close-up naked pictures of her, but her face had to be in them as well. So it was kind of that thing, and she felt uncomfortable about it, but it was that feeling, well, I feel uncomfortable, but I should do it anyway, just to kind of get over that. And that was kind of her mentality every time she had to do something that she felt uncomfortable with. So Keith was he orchestrated the whole thing.
It's not a self-help group. What kind of woman's movement, self-help movement or group is headed by a man? Like, that just wouldn't happen. So obviously it makes sense that they would like kind of hide the fact that he was even a part of it or at the top of it, because obviously it seems much less legit when you actually know that it's like this gross man at the top of it.
Yeah, and part of Seduced as well, India's talking about one of their punishments was, I forget what they had done, but they were all punished, and their punishment was they all had to line up naked and sit on the couch together, and Allison took a picture of all of them naked, and then she sent it over to Keith, and then Keith texts back, and they saw the text message from Keith, and he was like, oh, are those all for me, with a devil emoji? And they're just kind of like, well, what the fuck is this? So it was very much just, look what I've got for you, Keith, kind of thing. So very disturbing. And we think about it, I just wonder if Alice and Mac knew what this all was when they were coming up with DOS, or if she was being totally manipulated as well. I sway back and forth. I don't know if she's culpable completely, or if she was just a victim as well.
I really don't know. I feel like she is culpable, or I mean, I feel like she is a victim in many ways, because she was so under his wing, and I just think, I don't know, she got so far into it that maybe she turned a little bit evil towards the end there. But I feel like obviously at the beginning of it, she was very much in it because she thought it was a good thing, and it was just him that was manipulating her. But I mean, I feel like we haven't explained it in full, but I'm sure if you know this case, you know. But Allison Mack was an actress. She was on the show Smallville for like 10 years. She played Chloe on that show. So if you're a fan of Smallville, you definitely know about this case. But I was saying, if for some reason you don't know, Allison Mack was an actress who was in that. She was also in Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. If you watch that as well, she's in there as a kid. Anyway, so for anyone who doesn't know, but Allison Mack, yes, she was an actress. So it's just crazy to think that somebody who was like in Hollywood, who was in like a big show, that's as big of a show as Smallville was, to be a part of this and in this secret society and taking collateral of these women and branding them with her initials. Like, it's so wild to think of that.
Speaking of Allison Mack, she also recruited one of her other co-stars, Kristen Kirk, who also starred in Smallville as well. But she, very early on, she discovered what NXIVM really was and got out pretty early on.
You know, yeah, she got out early. She knew what was up, or, you know, suspected something for sure. But I think that is part of the allure for a lot of the people, because we kind of touched on this before, but some of the high caliber people that were in NXIVM, in Seduce, they mentioned people like Jennifer Aniston took some of the ESP courses, or she took like the course, and obviously she didn't stay in it, she left, but there was a lot of like celebrities that were in there taking courses, and that was something that they used to promote it. And then of course you have the billionaire sisters, the Brofman sisters, who were endorsing it and had, you know, given hundreds of millions of dollars to the organization. And then you had the Dalai Lama come in there and get pictures with Keith and stuff like that. So you have these really famous, wealthy, influential people. And I think in Seduce, they say when you have people like that in there, it's kind of like they have already done the research for you. You don't have to kind of look at the background, because you think that these smart people have already done that for you, already done the research, and that's why they're in it. And so it's okay for you to go in. And that's how they got a lot of people. So... Yeah.
Like, didn't they have to? Yeah, because they were financing most of it with the Bronfman sisters, who were just basically heirs to like this huge fortune from their father. But so they had hundreds of millions, so their entire financing was done by them, and they paid the Dalai Lama like a lot of money to take a photo with Keith, to basically legitimize or make it seem like NXIVM was this great thing. And also, yeah, Katie, you're right. Like, if you see, you know, an advertisement with the head of this company with the Dalai Lama, you're not going to really do much research into it. You're like, oh, it's the Dalai Lama. He must know what he's talking about. Or, you know, Jennifer Aniston took an ESP course. Or, I mean, there's probably a lot of like famous celebrities who like took one ESP course one time. Obviously weren't in NXIVM and weren't in the cult, but they might have taken this self-help kind of program.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about it for myself, even I remember being a huge fan of Smallville. So if I was in that situation where I saw Allison Mack is in this group, then I'm like, yeah, I want to be in there too, if that was my thing. You know what I mean? So it definitely does have that credibility when you have those kind of people in there.
I don't think it's mentioned in either The Vow or Seduced, but there was an early like news article that I saw that said that Allison Mack had even tweeted at Kelly Clarkson and Emma Watson in an attempt to recruit them. Like, she sent them messages saying, oh, I hear you're a fan of Smallville. Well, I'm a huge fan of you, and I'm a part of this women's movement that I think you'd really be into. So send me a message and we can like start, you know, a very clear recruitment attempt. Obviously, Emma Watson or Kelly Clarkson did not respond, but it's just crazy that it's like those were the kind of people that they were going after, like these very powerful, like successful people.
I think that's really dangerous to try and recruit someone like Emma Watson, because she's such a feminist and like women's rights, and the second she got a whiff of what was happening, you know, she would have been pissed. So that was kind of a not a smart
ballsy
thing, maybe.
Yeah,
it was. Maybe she wasn't thinking about that, but or maybe she was and was like, if we can manipulate her and she's such a feminist, then we'll definitely have more credibility. Some of the things that when Keith is lecturing or have these speeches when he's talking to people, it's very much downplaying like victim and rape culture and things, and he's saying that you're only a victim because that's how you perceive it. And so if you are raped, you're only raped because you think it's a bad thing, but if you just open yourself up to that, it's no longer rape. And he talks about an example of someone that was being abused, like sexually abused by her father, and he said, and when he says abuse, he puts it in air quotes, abused by her father, but she actually loved it and she enjoyed it, and the only reason that she called abuse was because she realized that society told her it was abuse, and so she's like, oh, it's abuse. But if it wasn't for society, she wouldn't have been a victim because she didn't see herself that way. So that was kind of the mentality, and it wasn't like he would say these kinds of things over and over again to get people to be like, you're only a victim because it's in your head.
Yeah, very misogynistic, gaslighting at its finest. Honestly, just like, yeah, that's Keith is just obviously he's a horrible person. If you can't tell by now.
Yeah, he's obviously awful, but it just sucks. That's one of those things where it could have been, and it did start out as could have been such a good program to help people get over some of the things that people actually should get over, but then he just, takes it too far, of course, like every cult leader. So we were talking about India Oxenberg and how she was branded, but she still felt okay about it, even when things were coming, like her mother was trying to get her out and even told her, you're being brainwashed, they're brainwashing you. And she was, saying, no, I'm not, you don't know what you're talking about. And she talks in this interview, when she talks about it in Seduced, she says that just how very, not believing she was of her mom and the outside world and all these things. When they came out about Keith, she still didn't believe them. And so that's how deep in she was. But the reason that all this got exposed, one of the reasons, was because when Sarah got her brand, and it was supposed to be a secret, but she did show her husband and tell him about it, he was the one, because he was in NXIVM too, he was like, what the hell, like, this is actually not okay. And she told her friend Mark Vicente, who was like the VP of communications for NXIVM. They were really close, and he was very high up.
He was the one who got her in, Sarah.
Yeah. And so when she tells him about all this, and Mark's wife was in it as well, they kind of all banded together, and somehow their eyes were opened about all this that was happening. And that is kind of NXIVM's downfall, was the branding that Sarah got, and that was just unacceptable to her husband.
Yeah, and eventually, the FBI caught wind of this. They obviously reported it, and then eventually, I remember the first time I ever heard about NXIVM was, I think it was the day that Keith was arrested. Like, it was all over the news that Allison Mack was a part of this sex cult, and the leader of the sex cult was arrested in Mexico because he fled to Mexico like during the initial investigations, because I guess he thought he would be safe. And it's actually, I think it's in the Vow actually, where they like talk about how they found out where he was staying in Mexico, because all these people moved down there with him, and they were posting like social media pictures with like clear visible landmarks that they were able to trace to like where they were. And anyway, they ended up finding Keith where he was living with like a harem of women in this mansion in Mexico. Anyway, the FBI arrested him and took him, and Allison Mack and Lauren Salzman and a couple others actually chased the police car down when they took Keith, which is embarrassing to say the least.
That's cringy.
That's actually, I think the first news article I ever read and heard about NXIVM was that Allison Mack was chasing a police car with the leader of the sex cult. I was like, what sort of tabloid is that? I thought it was like fake, but yeah, it's actually true what happened. And so Keith was eventually indicted and arrested, as was Nancy Salzman and Lauren Salzman and Allison Mack. They were kind of, the four of them were really the top people, right? You would say, like, those four are really the big, and the Bronfman sisters too, who were kind of financing the whole thing. But they ended up getting indicted by the FBI, and they all went to trial.
Keith Raniere was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, attempted sex trafficking conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, and wire fraud conspiracy. And he was actually sentenced to 120 years in prison. Allison Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy, and she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Claire Brofman pleaded guilty to conspiracy to conceal and harbor an undocumented immigrant for financial gain and fraudulent use of identification.
Was that even related to NXIVM, or was that something else personal? Like, who is she harboring? What the hell?
Yeah, what the hell? There's a story there somewhere.
Yeah.
It says convicted for an NXIVM sex scandal, so I'm assuming. Anyway, she was sentenced to 81 months in prison. Lauren Salzman.
Was that maybe, I think it's in The Vow or maybe Seduced, where like Keith was holding that woman hostage in her bedroom for like...
Oh, I was going to bring that up. Yeah, another crazy thing that kind of shows the mind control that Keith had over these people was, I don't remember if it was like a punishment or it was something like a lesson that this woman had to learn, and they called her Danielle. I'm not even sure if that was her real name. Anyway, she was told that she had to go in this room, in this house, a bedroom, until she could think about what she did or, you know, kind of reflect on whatever. She fucking stayed in that room for 2 years, and she wasn't locked in. She could have walked out at any time. They would kind of like deliver her food at the door, and she would just pick it up and eat it in her room. And she was in there for 2 years on her own, like her own free will, in quotes, because she wasn't locked in, and just because she didn't feel like she deserved that she should get out yet. So that's messed up.
So crazy. It's so crazy. It just goes to show you, like, the mind control that he had over these people. Like, these people are willingly doing this because of what he says.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, so maybe Claire Bronfman involved in that? Is that why she's getting a harboring? What is that? Harboring of someone? Was that the charge?
Conspiracy to conceal and harbor an undocumented immigrant for financial gain.
Oh, so maybe that's not related to that. I don't know.
It could have been. I remember, like, in Seduce Again, they talked about there was a lot of Mexican people that had come up for this party that they were having at India Oxenberg's mother's house when they were just like right in the beginning, one of the ESP party things, and a lot of people had come up from Mexico because they had a big following there. So that could have been a Mexican that they were hiding in that room, or it could have been somebody, like, I don't know, a foreign person that was just in there for 2 years that really should not have been in the country even, let alone fucking stuck in that room.
Yeah. Looks some shady shit, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, then Lauren Salzman was pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy, and she was sentenced to 5 years of probation. Nancy Salzman pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy, and she was sentenced to 42 months in prison. And there's another person here, and I don't know who she is. Kathy Russell pleaded guilty to visa fraud.
So there's this actress, Nikki Klein, and she is in Battlestar Galactica, but she apparently had married Allison Mack, but it was just so that she could get a visa or a green card to move to Albany because she was in NXIVM and still is in NXIVM, or it's not called NXIVM now, but it's a very, very small group under a different name, but they still follow Keith Raniere. And Nikki Klein gave a very cringe interview. She went on a podcast and basically was defending saying the media was lying and that NXIVM was a great thing. So, I mean, that was cringy. But yeah, I don't think that's not Kathy Russell or whatever her name is. So I don't know what that is, but Nikki Klein, I mean, allegedly she married Allison Mack so she could get a green card or visa, but it's all alleged.
Yeah, and Keith still has his followers. Like in Seduce, they show them dancing outside of his prison window, like that kind of thing. Like that was cringe.
Yeah, yeah. And that guy who got over his Tourette's because of Keith or because of NXIVM, he's still a follower, and he's one of the dancers outside the prison too.
Well, I get that it helped him for sure, but yeah, there has to become a point where you I don't know, you can't keep denying everything that's out there about it. Like when I was watching The Vow, India Oxenberg was not in The Vow, but I think it was The Vow, and her mother was, and they kept talking about how she was trying to get India out and how deep in she was. And I was kind of thinking, like, oh, like, who is this India person? It'd be so interesting to hear it from her perspective. And then Seduced is from, like, India's perspective, her story in it, and that was super interesting. And now she finally realized, you know, what she did wrong, and she didn't get charged with anything because she was the one that had given like a flash drive over to the police with a bunch of conversations that Keith had about a lot of stuff that he was charged for. So that was her. But anyway, and so it was super interesting to hear her side. But now I want to hear Allison Mack's side. And does she still side with Keith? Does she think she was brainwashed? Was she compliant the whole time? Like, I really want to hear her side of the story now. I wonder if she'll ever come out with that.
Sarah Edmondson and her husband, Nippy, they have a podcast called A Little Bit Culty. So they do talk a lot about this. And I believe on that podcast they say that they've heard that Allison Mack has woken up. She's not on Keith's side anymore. She's realized what she was involved in. So, I mean, that's good. That's all obviously, we haven't heard anything from Allison Mack directly, but that's kind of what I've heard by listening to that podcast. So hopefully that's true. And that was like early on in the podcast. So I haven't like listened to every episode, but that's as far as I know. But I hope that's true, that she's kind of realized.
If she has realized, and she'll come out with there'll be another documentary about it from her perspective, which would be super interesting.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued because there's a lot of actually YouTube videos still on YouTube of when she was in NXIVM, and like she's interviewing Keith in like a promotional video for NXIVM, and it's so crazy to see. You can tell how enamored with him she is, like the way she looks at him, the way she talks to him, like she's like looking. It's really crazy to watch, especially in retrospect.
Oh yeah, I know. I always think about that when I think about like how deep in she was, and in Seduced when they show some of the V week and the performance, and she's like singing and just like the emotion coming out of her and like staring at Keith, and she just wants his approval. You can just see how deep in she was and how much she thought of Keith, you know, like how much respect and love even she had for him. So it was kind of crazy.
After Keith was convicted, a federal lawsuit was filed in New York accusing Raniere and 14 associates. So this would be Nancy, Claire, Sarah, Lauren, Allison, Kathy Russell, and there's Nikki Klein, and there's a few others in there, like the Danielle Roberts. They're all there's a federal lawsuit of them for conducting illegal psychological experiments on members of the company and abusing them physically, emotionally, and financially. Those are some other lawsuits that were filed. And also, in September of 2020, a judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York sentenced Brofman to 6 years and 9 months in federal prison. And her attorney promised to appeal, calling the sentence an abomination.
Oh yeah, and her bail was set at like $100 million, which is the highest bail ever in American history.
Oh my God, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. While Raniere is incarcerated, he still maintains his leadership role over NXIVM, and he regularly communicates with his followers by phone.
And Keith is like gross. Like you look at him and he looks awkward, and if he kisses everybody on the lips. If I was there and was like close enough to him to have to do that, like I just feel gross about it. You know what I mean? Like he looks gross for one thing, just the way he talks.
Sleazy.
And his narcissism is even grosser. Yeah, and then he just gives everyone a big old smooch on the lips every time he sees them. Like it's just,
I remember watching The Vow, and they were doing like the volleyball game that they would stay up to like fucking 6 a.m. in the morning or whatever, and like just him with his fucking headband on and his stupid short shorts.
I know, he looks like a fucking idiot.
Like,
he thinks he's so
loser
cool and smart. And I'm just like, oh, you're so stupid. Just the way he carries himself, he thinks he is like the ruler of everything, and it's so dumb.
Still, now that he's in prison, he still thinks he can manipulate people.
Well, no. Well, they think he was wrongfully convicted, and that's what their stance is. But also in like the latest developments, so there's a Rolling Stone article from 4 days ago, and it says that Keith Raniere is trying to appeal his conviction. He's in the process of appealing it, which, I mean, there's not a chance in hell, I wouldn't say, but he's going to try.
Yes, but even if he gets one overturned, all of those convictions I don't think are going to get overturned. So he's going to definitely be in jail for a while. There's no way they're all going to be overturned.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if he's successful in overturning one conviction, okay, so instead of being in prison for 120 years, he's just in prison for 100 years. So.
Yeah, so have fun getting out.
So basically, overall, it was horrific. I mean, as you can tell from the details, it's horrific. There's still so much involved in this cult. Like I said, it went on for decades, and there's so much involved. Like, we didn't even, go into many different aspects. Like, there was another woman who allegedly committed suicide, but then they think that it might have been not suicide, and she was killed by somebody within NXIVM or something. Allegedly, there's some articles. Her name was Kristen Snyder, and they do mention her in the Seduced documentary. So if you do want to know more information about this cult, then we're going to be putting some in the show notes, we'll have some links to documentaries and some news articles and stuff. So definitely take a look in the show notes to read more, because like I said, there's definitely way more than we even mentioned, because, just when you think it can't get crazier, it does.
Yeah, definitely. It's a crazy one.
And to think that it wasn't that long ago that this cult came about. We heard about it because it was recently in the news, which most cults these days aren't in the news because they're like super old. But this one just happened to be, which was funny because I learned about this cult before we even started the podcast.
Oh yeah.
I remember us talking about it.
But I didn't hear about it until all the shit went down and they were getting arrested. And I remember Lisa was like, "Did you hear Alex Max getting arrested for being in a cult?" And I was like, "What the hell?" And that's kind of where I looked into it.
Yeah, because she probably saw the same article I did of, Allison Mack chases after a car. That's literally the first article I saw. It was crazy.
Chasing after the police car in Mexico. It's like, okay.
Yeah, Allison Mack chasing after a police car in Mexico that held the leader of a sex cult, which she was involved in. Like, what? Please, I need to read more. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, so that's like a crazy thing.
Yeah. Lisa's our other sister, by the way, if you didn't know. But
the rogue sister.
Yeah, the rogue sister who didn't want to be on the show. Or whatever. She's not on the podcast. So, did anyone have any final thoughts or anything else before we wrap it up?
I just want to say, when I first, most of these cults, when I first started doing doing research for it, I didn't know how deep NXIVM was and how sleazy it was.
Yeah, and I also think it's maybe important again to reiterate some of the warning signs or the red flags, because there are still cults today, and you or someone could be in a cult. So I think some of the warning signs are when the group is isolating them from their family and friends, when that's kind of their only priority is this group. If they're, I don't know, they have a sudden change in appearance or personality, that could be a red flag as well. Especially, of course, if there's this almighty leader that they are bowing down to in a way, or someone that they see as superior, those are definitely red flags. Those are just off the top of my head.
Yeah, and a lot of these cults, everyone we've mentioned, and most cults do have the same sort of set of red flags. And I guess just as a general reminder to everyone, if something seems a little bit too good to be true, there's a good chance that it is. If it seems a little bit on the culty side, based on some of the things you've heard in this miniseries or other cults you know of, like I said, we have that fight or flight response for a reason. We have our intuition for a reason. So definitely listen to that if something seems a little bit off. So that about does it for our cult miniseries. It's been interesting to take a look at these 4 cults and talk about them in depth. So we hope that you've enjoyed. We hope you've enjoyed the miniseries, and hope you've learned maybe a little bit of something about one of these cults you didn't know about, or just learned some things to be weary of when it comes to cults. But yeah.
So one thing I just wanted to mention that I forgot about. Another thing is even. You think it can't happen to you, but of course we hear this it can happen to you. And one good example is in NXIVM. This one of the members who was in for almost 10 years actually grew up in the Children of God cult. She escaped that, got out of that, and then she found herself in NXIVM somehow, and she's like, I can't believe I got myself into another cult. So even her having that background and being probably hyper aware of the situation was still able to be sucked in. So you just never know, and you always have to keep your mind open about that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, and also we'll just we'll say the name of the documentaries again. So you can watch The Vow, which is on HBO. Definitely check that out. And then you can watch Seduced Inside the NXIVM Cult, which was a Starz documentary or docuseries. So definitely find that on the streaming apps. And yeah, definitely watch them because they are very eye-opening and crazy. You can find us on all the social medias as always. We're on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast. We're on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1, and we are on Facebook at Crime Family Podcast. You can always send us an email as well. We're crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. Send us those case suggestions, because we're always really interested to know what cases you guys want us to cover, and we might discover a really great one based on a suggestion. So definitely do that if you have a good case for us. You can also visit our website at crimefamilypodcast.ca. You can listen to all of our episodes on the website. There's also transcripts there, and there is a link to our merch store, which is coming at some point soon. So it's not a link to the merch store, but a page for the upcoming merch store. So it is coming. It's in a work in progress. Okay. So thank you guys for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the miniseries, and we'll be back next week with a new episode. So until then, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.